Welcome to a video on the brand new BMW Z4, and I'm going to gloss over certain areas because I'm going to be covering multiple Z4s in the future and of course the Supra. So you're going to learn a little bit about the driving part, the interior, the technical stuff, and then the final thoughts. But in terms of interior space, this is a convertible, a hardtop-ish convertible with an electric roof. There's no manually touching any types of locks. It does it all for you. You can pull it up with the switch of a button and push it down. And you can see the operation is pretty smooth. It's not the fastest. Obviously, if you're coming from like a Miata with a manual top, this is gonna be, seems like it takes forever. Now, I may fit the bill to drive a convertible due to my weak ass hairline, among other things. My big concern was visibility because this roof line is really low and it's by design. With the top up, I felt a little bit more claustrophobic, but this is, when you really sit in it, and I've had some bigger people in here, there's a ton of leg room, there's a ton of hip room. I feel like the seat doesn't go low enough in terms of adjustment, but despite that, even if you're a taller person, you have plenty of head clearance once that top is up. So I feel like this is a well-sorted interior for different body types. And the adjustability of the wheel is pretty good despite it being a manual adjustment, which in this price range is kind of weird. There's just more room to grow than like an S2000, a Miata, and I would say it's probably on par with a Boxster, maybe a little bit better. The only thing you're going to notice is the side sills are a little bit larger on this car, and that was by design. They wanted to improve the structural rigidity of it, and they took more of a performance approach more than a usability or practicality setup. Now, more along the lines of comfort is the seats. In terms of this trim level, you can ride all day in here and have zero fatigue. There's plenty of adjustment in the seat back. Your thigh cushions are adjustable. It's just the kind of the, you can't get as low as I would like in here, but that might be solved with, you know, more sporty seat options and rails. The sound system, despite me not measuring it, is surprisingly good, and it's tuned, you can tell, to be played at higher volumes, because at lower volumes, it's kind of like really flat. There's kind of lacks this bass response, but the equalization of it as you're driving, the speed compensation's good, and you do have the ability to change the EQ settings in here to adjust individual bands, which is always a positive thing. But my guess is if we measured this specific car, it would measure out to most Harman systems. But the other thing is, you know, it's a lot more hard to engineer it for a convertible. So I would say once you're really utilizing it with the top down and driving, it's satisfying, and that helps because you have drivers behind the seat but not built into the headrest. Storage space is on the weaker side, as you would expect with a car like this. The door pockets are tiny. It's going to fit a wallet at best. Your cup holder design is skewed because you have to open one of the armrests to do that, and it's a split armrest, so only the right side is going to hold cups. So that means if you're a passenger and there's a cup in here, you're kind of screwed. The center console is average. They take up way too much space for all these buttons. There's no storage there except in the upper pocket where you can put your phone on the wireless charger, USB port, and stuff like that. But basically, you got to go in knowing that you're not going to have a ton of storage here. Trunk space is surprisingly good. It's bigger than like what you'd get on a Miata. You can legitimately put things back there. There's a small pass-through for your, like your 9-iron or whatever, your baseball bat, whatever you're going to hit people with. When you're road raging, your glove box can fit a pretty decent size, a couple decent size items, but basically you're going to have to pack light, put most of the stuff in the trunk. Now it's time to talk about safety and electronics. Safety first. They have a cute trick with their start-stop system if you leave it enabled. You come to a stop, the engine cuts out, and then typically it restarts when you take your foot off the brake or hit the gas. Well, this uses its radar system, so when you're behind a car at a stop, and they move, the car will restart when it detects the car moving in front of you. So that's nice. The auto lane keep assist is super aggressive when you have it on that mode. It will literally, you know, if you cross the line, it'll rip that steering wheel out of your hand. I mean, it's not like that ridiculous, but it really is aggressive. The thing that I found that was annoying about it is when a line disappears, like a turn lane comes up, it will start to pull you over towards the turn lane. So you really got to be hyper aware when it's on, or tweak your settings or just completely turn it off. Now, infotainment, this is a big one because this is their next generation unit, which I dealt with in the X5, and I felt like this is something that, again, worked really well, and they had to go muck it up by adding so much more, and a lot of it has to do with adding more connected services to the internet. You now have all these multiple menu panes, up, down, left, right, and you're trying to struggle where things are at. There's even more menu jumping than there was before. It's nice that you can use it as a touchscreen when you're parked because there's the pinch to zoom aspect of it. It's very quick. BMW has one of the most fluid and quick graphical user interfaces of any car. It's almost smartphone-like, but the complexity here is super, super frustrating. And, you know, people are complaining about, well, wireless Apple CarPlay is a service where you have to pay for it, because a lot of it is they want to be able to update the vehicles without having things downloaded here that just are static, so they constantly can keep it up to date. But now you need Bluetooth and wireless enabled on your phone, which is partly the connection issue. You have to cut out latency with wireless, so there's not a lot of buffering there. So if you have a problem, it just basically stops working. And it's stuff like this that's not refined, and they're using the drivers and the buyers as beta testers for a lot of this. If you don't use it like I do a lot, I just turn the screen off and just drive. But that's a good point to transition from this into the shop and take a look at the mechanicals. I am under the brand new BMW Z4. And of course, I have my Adidas formal wear on because of this. And so many people get hung up on the discussion between the Supra and the Z4, and I could care less. I just want to know what makes it good technically. So I'm going to try to sum this up without you falling asleep. So BMW went to Toyota when they were co-developing this, and they said, we don't have a dedicated sports car platform. Everything is just kind of a tarted up version of a luxury sedan. Like the M3 is really a 3 Series. That with some performance parts added to it. And this is what they keep doing, and it's cost effective. So they wanted to build, if they were going to do something, a dedicated 2-seat sports car. Now, it's still based on the Lard architecture, which means it does share some similar components, but the whole thing isn't, this isn't a 3 Series underneath, it's a Z4. So one of the things that they reutilized was the M4's front suspension, and this is exactly what you see on all the M-Car front suspension. Struts, all aluminum components, or reinforced components. Certain things are forged. The only thing missing here is the aluminum shock bodies. But of course, you know there's going to be a full-blown M version where you're going to see all of that added back, thicker sway bars, all that crap. The next thing you're going to see here is this aluminum skid plate. And this is here because they wanted to lower the center of gravity. And one of the ways they do that is lowering the engine and the engine base. So the oil pan is so close here, they need to protect it. There's other things you're going to notice, like cooling. The intercooler has ductwork here that flows from the bumper out. The front wheel skirts, all for airflow. This is really well covered up underneath, and they still use this carpeted composite material for NVH. So it's not totally hardcore. They too try to balance the refinement in that. But I think that's enough for the front half of this car. Let's head into the back. The rear half of the Z4 is a lot less exotic. Everything's stamped steel, subframe, lower control arms. The only thing here is the knuckle design, and it really doesn't need it. You have a limited slip differential, but the main thing you notice is all the attempts to quiet the car down. The plastic panels, the carpeted pieces, and the wheel wells. You can see how it flows air from the center of the car over the lower control arm covers to these directors to a really flat muffler design, which helps prevent parachuting. Now, the last thing to talk about is this has an 8-inch shorter wheelbase than the M2, but it has almost an identical track. So it's a short wheelbase, wide stance car, which is the other reason why this is differentiated and different from the other BMW vehicles. Let's head under the hood. Under the hood of the Z4, this has the 4-cylinder option, the 4-cylinder turbo, which probably most people are going to laugh at. I'm going to tell you, it's not something to laugh at, which I'll talk about in the drive. But there's a couple things I noticed right away. Look at them. Tyrell said, why does this have strut tower braces that connect it to the radiator support bracket and the Supra doesn't? Well, Tyrell, it's a convertible. You need all that structural rigidity. The second thing I'm going to tell you, Tyrell, is when you remove these air boxes, you can fit in the engine bay. I'm not kidding you. I could literally fit in there. There's that much space. And why is that great? Well, you can see the subframe. You can see the electronic power motor for the EPS system. You can also physically touch the turbo, the exhaust manifold. You can get your damn hands in here. You can get to everything, which might be a huge benefit to somebody that wants to tune this and work on it versus having the inline 6, which everybody talks about. Now, the other part of it is the batteries in the back, typical BMW stuff for weight distribution, and they put the LG Chemical lithium-ion battery in the front for their kind of mild hybrid system for energy recapture and restarting and all that. But everything else here is pretty straightforward BMW stuff, with the exception this is a midship design where the engine is stuffed behind the strut towers. Again, this is for weight distribution. This will also be lighter than inline six, which you totally feel when driving it, and I'm gonna get into that in the drive. Speaking of that, let's hit the road. I think it's time to set off on the Z4. Ooh, 4-cylinder power. And I'm gonna get into that in a minute. First thing to talk about is there are so many different layers to modern BMWs. The Z4 is absolutely no different. If you didn't know it, you'd think you're just driving some overly refined luxury car. You basically don't hear anything, you don't feel anything, you're very isolated from the road, it's super quiet. Specifically with the top up, which, you know what, I'm just going to put the top up right now because I think all we're going to do is hear wind noise, which isn't really that big of a deal for me, but for you, it's not a premium experience. So once we put the top up, it's far more quiet. And the top up and down operation is quick, but you know, of course, it's nothing like a manual top. But I think the strangest thing is being in here and realizing that you don't even know it's a convertible. Most people are like, wow. And even your Bluetooth calling, they put the microphones in the upper pillars here, and even the people that, when your top is up or down, people don't even notice that you're on a call. And I think this is where this car gets a little bit confusing to me, is, you know, again, BMW wants to put all these glossy layers on top of a car that they said is like, hey, look, we're trying to make this kind of like a Porsche Boxster competition. And, you know, when you target a car like that, specifically a car that is mid-engine, you're making a big statement. But here's the thing. I drove this at a press event, the Mama press event, where you get all the journalists together, you drive a bunch of cars, and they have a competitive autocross where you can drive cars like the M2 competition, you can drive the new Veloster N, the 370Z, and you know, a whole bunch of vehicles, and everybody out there kept ignoring the Z4. And I finally said, I think there was like 25, 30 of us. I'm like, I overheard a bunch of guys saying, look, the Z4 is like the worst car out here. And everybody kept trying to jump into the M2 competition and the new Miata. And I thought to myself, I'm like, all right, I got to get in the Z4. And my very first drive, and I think I'd driven like 6 or 7 cars at that point, my very first drive, I thought, holy shit, this is the best car out here. And, you know, again, I overheard more conversation. Oh, the Z4 is slow, the 4-cylinder sucks. And I told one of the guys who I didn't know, I'm like, I think it's the best car out here by a long stretch. And that was proven later on in the day, which you don't know your times until they present it. I had the fastest time of the day, first and second best time. And then Jack had first, second, and third best time in his group. And the reason is, this is one of those rare cars that's on the market today where it rotates itself through every turn under braking. It will trail brake through every single turn, which means when you get deep into the brake pedal, the car has a natural tendency to want to rotate through a turn without having to use throttle. And the best part is, in tighter turns like autocross, because you have the 4-cylinder power and the way that the balance of the car is set up, it's just a far more precision driving experience. Where the M2, you'd get out there in the M2 and all that thing wanted to do was spin out. You didn't have to even breathe on the throttle. The car wanted to spin out in every turn. So what you're doing is you're constantly sawing at the wheel to correct it. And this car was not like that, in large part because you have manageable and usable horsepower. Now, as usual, I'm going to come to a stop and show you some acceleration, which, you know, this is not the model for outright performance, but you're gonna get a good idea here. Sport plus, traction stability off, let's do it. I feel like the power in this car is 100% adequate for the street. You can just get a little bit of rotation under throttle when you're going flat out. But other than that, all the time, this car can be completely utilized. It's very much like a Miata on steroids. You have just enough excitement to get you going where you don't feel like it's a total shit show, but just enough power where you don't get in trouble and you can go flat out whenever you want. And the fact that you're not going to overwhelm the car because the chassis has so much potential in it, you can nail it through turns on the street without feeling like you're going to kill yourself or somebody else. And the big benefit, the car is a lot of fun to drive. Now, the big negative part about the Z4 is it doesn't sound good. The 4-cylinder sounds like a vacuum cleaner, and there is this little bit of farting that the exhaust does, which is not as annoying as the inline 6. This is a much quieter experience. So there's a couple people that would consider the 4-popper and the Z4. It's those that want a top-down experience, somebody that values refinement, quietness, and comfort over just outright like rawness of a sports car. And that's why I said when I started this, BMW is the master at applying all this lacquer in layers to their cars to the point where you don't really know what's underneath anymore. And I think to me, that's one of the biggest negative parts about driving this, because you have to drive it. You have to drive it at 100%, 8 to 9/10 to really feel the gold underneath, the greatness that they've developed into the body structure. And you really have to kind of understand how to drive. So if this is going to be your first rear-wheel drive car, this is going to be a great one to learn on. And the second part is you might even consider getting the 4-cylinder over the inline 6 to autocross this. And it's because it's controllable, it's easy to learn. I'd almost say it's kind of Nerf. With the inline 4, it's very safe, but it's also one of the most dynamic, correctly dynamic, sporty cars that you could possibly get in the modern car history. Final thoughts on the Z4. When I got behind the wheel of this car, I knew all the technical stuff. I knew they were trying to make a more dedicated platform to be a sports car, a 2-seater roadster. And I'm like, here we go again. It's BMW overly refining every aspect of the driving experience. Now, granted, this is not supposed to be that hardcore sports car model. You know, it's toned down. And I think that's also the beauty of it. It has this element of refinement with the top up and the top down. It's comfortable to use every day. There's just enough space to make it the car that you can take everywhere without making you think, well, I'm only going to drive it on the weekends, which is something that I have a problem with my own sports cars. When you strip the refinement away and you make it the purest, most fun to drive car, it's not that enjoyable when you're burned out at the end of a work week or a work day, or it's 1,000 degrees outside and you're baking on the inside of the car. And that's what BMW does very well, is they lacquer over, they put all these layers on top of their cars, and then they still make it kind of fun to drive underneath. And that's exactly what's going on here. But the main difference with the Z4, this new platform, is finally, it feels like once you strip away all that and you drive this at 8, 9, 10/10, where the excitement of all the development they put in the weight distribution, the structural integrity of the car comes out when you could trail the brakes and the car will rotate. The car will rotate naturally without having to crank the wheel, without totally understeering first. You don't have to fight the car. And the best part is this feels like a sports car that they've added on luxury to. Instead of being a luxury car first, that they tarted up into a sports car. And that's one of my big problems with a lot of the M vehicles that are out there today. They still feel like luxury cars trying to be a sports car. Yes, the balance is great, all that, but they don't have a connectedness that this car does when you drive it at the limits and you want to drive it like a driver's car. And I think that's why this vehicle, this platform, has such a high potential. I'm so excited when they finally put the higher horsepower motors in it, potentially a manual transmission. I think this is going to be a dream come true for so many BMW people and non-BMW people, and I'm serious about that. So this is a great car for somebody, like I said during the driving part. If you're looking for your first rear-wheel drive car, you want to know what a proper, dynamically balanced vehicle feels like, that still has more of the oversteery aspects that you have to learn how to drive a car properly to exploit. It also has the great part for being a street. If you get the 4-cylinder, you can utilize all the horsepower and never want for more. But if you're a more seasoned driver, this is not going to be fast enough. And I'm just going to say that. The other part is, if you're looking for something a little bit more aggressive, this is way too toned down in typical BMW fashion. You're going to have to wait till the more aggressive models or go to the Supra. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next video.
I'm on my laptop right now. This is the gentleman you're leaving me for? Very well. I hate the savage geese. I'm going to show you how to get rid of them. Just like this.